Hi, and a warm welcome to Space by Stensons, the podcast where we dig into the dreams, experiences, and lessons learned from leading voices in the design industry. Today, I'm jumping into a chat with Julian, the founding director at dMFK. I've got 3 projects to ask him about. Firstly, an early memory that has shaped his career. Secondly, a current scheme we need to keep a lookout for. And lastly, a future project that would be of his wildest dreams. And hey, before we roll, we feel the love when you share, rate, or follow the show. So please go for it. Now, on to Julian.
So thanks very much, Julian. Really appreciate you carving time out of your busy schedule and coming along.
It's a pleasure.
dMFK, I've seen some of your projects, mind-blowing, some of the awards you've won, and I thought I'd just have to chat to you and find out more about the 3 projects that you would put forward on this podcast and just learn, get into your head a bit more. So can you tell us about the journey, where you got to then setting up dMFK, how that took you?
When we started off with a really small practice, and I think it was just coming out of the early 90s recession, and there were a load of empty buildings that there were commercial buildings, and we did a lot of residential conversions of those buildings. I think in those days there was a fashion for chopping them up and selling them as shells, and people would then fit them out as lofts. So we did tons of these fit outs, and in doing that, it was me and a friend, and we got to know the developers who were carving up those buildings. They were either old factories or old schools. And it moved from residential space into workspace because one of those developers, it's the project I'm going to talk about, was called Sapcoat. There's a chap called Ashley Nicholson, a very interesting guy who had this vision that he could carve up these buildings not into residential spaces but into workspaces and provide a whole load of different sizes of tenancy, so small businesses could benefit from larger businesses, and the larger businesses wouldn't be sort of in these single tenant environments. And so they came to us completely out of the blue. There were only 2 of us working for the firm, working for ourselves at the time, to divide up this old BBC studio in Chiswick called Power Road Studios, or they called it Power Road Studios. And that's kind of how we sort of fell into that market. And I've always been friendly with a chap called Charlie Green, who ended up setting up the office group, and we've been talking about this this idea, and I'd taken to see Power Road Studios when it was done, and it just the whole idea of community-focused workspace evolved quite early, and it sort of came out of really understanding how to break up these old buildings.
So the Power Road Studios, that's a BBC place that was broken up, in small for workstations, kind of almost like an early sort of co-working offices space.
Very much so. I mean, I think Ashley, to his credit, wanted to go a lot further. So he was looking at putting other things in the building as well. So he wanted to put in residential. So there's a mixture of people living there, people working there, people making things and selling things, and there being a kind of environment. And I think he tried to set it up elsewhere. I think he did one in Bristol called Paintworks, where it was a lot more mixed up. But there's quite a lot of resistance in the market to breaking the mold. So it ended up being a workspace, which is great, with a communal area in the centre of it. It was a very early
It's a bit ahead of his time, sort of thing.
Yeah, co-working is a funny term, really. The work we've done with quite a lot of these providers isn't actually co-working. The co-working part is a sort of shared workspace at the front. It's like an introduction to what's behind, and then there's normally demised space behind. So the actual idea of co-working in itself is more of a hook than it is sort of the entire reason for the building to be there. We sort of did that project at the beginning, which maybe we'll talk about a bit more. And then we also did some work for the Tate. So when Tate Modern was finishing off with Herzog & Mühren, they obviously focused a lot of their attention on the front of house spaces and the galleries, but they didn't focus on the offices, the staff facilities, and the canteen, all that stuff that it's actually become what we do now. And we won this project to do that, just the two of us, which was brilliant. It was really fascinating. So we brought a lot of those communal ideas into what we did there.
And back then, that must have been pretty new for the industry. Like that kind. I was thinking back to the BBC one, but having for someone to have a vision to mix workspace and play and learning and all of those sort of community.
Yeah.
Was that a hard sell? Was that something that was accepted?
I think at that time, serviced offices were seen as kind of shady post boxes, and they quite often had sort of slightly less honourable things going on behind. So that was the perception of what serviced offices was. I think Charlie had been working at Marylebone Balfour MWB and had been sort of trying to develop a product that was more design led and more community led. So. There was a sort of a reticence in the market, or really an understanding of what it could be. But my experience of offices has always been, I think there were two things as a child that depressed me about architecture. One of them was going into Brent Cross shopping centre. That was where I first learned to be depressed by design. And then, and that's where you sort of learn how to walk around without lifting your feet off the floor. It's horrible. And then the others was just very standardized office environments. And so my first ever job, I won't name the very well-known architecture firm, but it was just a sea of desks with a load of suspended ceilings. And to me, that was the thought of spending the rest of my life in a place like that didn't fill me with joy. So I was very ready to look at how things could be different in the office environment, and ready to sort of use my career to try and improve that the workspace environments that we all go to for half our lives. And then I guess also the work that we did a lot of these fit outs of these shells of these loft buildings, are showing how we live can be different to what we're used to, and people were living in very different ways, and and a lot of the things that they were getting out of those loft apartments were fabulous ceiling heights, variety, sort of multiple orientations, light coming from different ways. Material design quality was all up to them in terms of how they fitted those spaces out. So it was a really fun time actually doing. I think me and Amit, my partner at that time, did probably 20 a year of these residential fit outs. So we were really turning over lots of ideas, sort of understanding that what you might want is different to what I might want. But the one thing that there are some unifying design factors that everyone will agree on. Everyone will walk into a space that's beautifully lit and feel good. And what we were talking about a second ago, everyone will walk into a space that acoustically feels great and feel comfortable. People will also recognise when things aren't very nice, when they're not very well ventilated, or when they sound odd, or when it's a room in a room. There are certain things that don't feel good, and so it was a really interesting way of testing all these things. And in the same way, I think retail and restaurants are really interesting in a sense that you never open a restaurant, you never open a shop without thinking about design in the most granular and sort of fundamental part of the selling process. And I think that's and it in retail, it's not alienating in any way. I think retailers at every level recognise that if they make beautiful environments, people feel comfortable in them. And it always bemused me that that in the world of house building, for example, people settle for crap, especially in the world of sort of provincial house building. The lowest common denominator in terms of design. I think people don't have great vision, but we saw at that time with the lofts that people really did. They really wanted to enjoy these things. So there is an appetite for in your home life and also then in your work life to experience levity and design quality, the sort of things that they got used to when they went shopping. or when they went to a restaurant.
So how big are these lofts?
People were buying sort of 1,000 square feet, 5,000 square feet, something really big.
Oh, they're massive.
They're huge.
I don't know why I've got this like small little attic room in my head, but I haven't.
They would
got that
loft.
right.
I always remember. I always thought that market was over when I saw loft basement loft for sale, which was kind of seemed like a mad oxymoron. But no, they were just conversions of these sort of redundant commercial buildings that came out of the 90s recession, which was fierce. So, in our experience, there were other buildings, but they were old factories and old schools. Obviously, a lot around here, around Shoreditch, and we were doing loads in Southwark, and But I think it was a moment in the early sort of 90s, coming out of that recession, where people started to realise how important design was in their day-to-day lives, whether it's where they lived or where they worked.
Mm-hmm. So was it quite high end, to say the least?
Some were, some weren't.
Okay.
I mean, that's definitely, they were aspirational type people, but also, I seem to remember people buying 1,000 square foot in Borough for, £60,000 and spending £30,000 on it. So in today's money, not much, no. So they were affordable ways to create interesting places to live. It's definitely an urban, definitely a sort of younger thing, but do you not remember that time? It was really interesting.
No.
Yeah, there was loads of it.
I don't at all. It's so interesting. Yeah, it's not like it's not something I've been exposed to, if you know what I mean. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just a sort of turnover of these buildings, and they were quite very, very generous as well. Mm-hmm. I remember doing one in Borough for this young couple, and it had the old bell tower of the school that went up, sort of 14-metre high bell tower, and we put a bathroom in the bell tower, and so it's all really fun stuff. And it's sort of, that's as a practice, probably because we started to practice sort of 1997, always doing retrofits, always fitting out buildings, although that wasn't perceived to be the kind of cool part of the market right then, so it's quite hard. I always felt kind of slightly less than for doing retrofits and working on existing buildings, because all the magazines were publishing shiny new builds, and I always felt that, well, proper architects don't do this, but I think that tide's definitely turned. Yeah. So as a practice, we've got 25 years of retrofits, of experience of doing that, and suddenly looking back at our back catalogue, and well, maybe we weren't that bad after all.
No, we're definitely, now with the whole sustainable thing and looking at reusing buildings and bringing them back in, it's got such a strong message anyway, hasn't it? So
yeah, I mean, it sort of comes naturally to us, because, and I think it's a hard part of the market. We talk about it a lot in the office because there's only certain architects that are, or interiors people, that are any good at it. It's definitely your bushwhacking in terms of your working style. Your buildings that are full of problems, and there's no easy solution to anything. You can't kind of reduce everything to a kind of a module or a simple diagram. Retrofit is definitely, you're in the weeds, and some people really enjoy it, and some people find it quite challenging.
Yeah.
I love it.
No, I can see that. I mean, we obviously most of what we do is obviously working in refits, because it's refitting out office spaces. So yeah, I quite like it, and it's also a bit quicker, like turnaround, if you know what I mean. You haven't got to wait for a whole building to be built. Yeah. So that, my impatient side, that kind of is nice too. So yeah, I can see pros and cons, but I can see people liking starting on a blank piece of paper, doing their thing,
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely challenges in some senses. We're doing a fit out for a really big law firm, and we were involved in their building search, mm-hmm. and they looked at 26 buildings, of which one was a new build, mm-hmm. and the rest were all retrofits, and they picked the new build. So there's definitely something we're going to watch for, is to make sure that our retrofits are done to a very, very high standard. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of the ones on the list that we looked at felt very compromised, and that's where the kind of existing building market is sort of, that's a threat. Mm-hmm. Is people, these buildings have to be done well. They have to be, you have to sort of be very careful with the values and the how to put it. It just has to be done well. If bad buildings are not gonna fly in this market.
No. You have to be considerate as well. It's tough getting the balance, isn't it? Because the older buildings, they might fall down in some areas, especially talking sustainably, but they might well fall down, or accessibility, all those type of things. So no, I can see that. You get some of those buildings, you want to use them, but they're not really very feasible.
Well, there's a lot of threats to solving the things you've just mentioned. I mean, things like accessibility it seems. I mean, in the old days, that was more of a concern. How are we going to make it happen? These days, we don't even think about it beyond that's the way it is. It just happens. The biggest threats I find on a lot of these historic buildings, if we're going to keep them, is a sort of slightly arcane approach to heritage. The best example is double glazing, for example. If you want a piece of heritage to last, then you need to be able to consider the fabric as something that secures its future. Tenant will come along and say, I need it to meet these standards, which is what happened with that law firm. So they're much more attracted to the brand new build that meets all of the standards. So if we want our historic buildings to meet those standards, we need to take a slightly sort of more relaxed approach, I think, to fabric, which includes double glazing a building and accepting that the mullions might get a bit thicker, or using interesting technologies to get around those sorts of things. But we can't allow heritage alone to dictate the way we refurbish our buildings. Otherwise, those buildings won't compete in the market because they won't be sustainable enough in their fabric, however beautiful they look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it's a really interesting point. It's a very hot topic with a lot of people as well. Right now, refit, stay, or remove. Do you know what I mean? There's a whole new building refurbish existing, etc., etc. So it's great to hear that. And some of those early moment projects that you were talking about then, pulling that up to today, and a project that you're working on today, or it's recently been released or something like that. Have you got a project that kind of you've taken those lessons and are now using them in today's projects?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think on that early project, the one that was called Power Road Studios, the one we did for Sapcoat, over the years, because that was in the mid-90s, whenever it was, there have been lots of clients who've come to us and said, well, we want to do a kind of sector-specific offices, so this is going to be for fintech or proptech or whatever those things are. And we've always found that never didn't seem like an approach that works particularly well, although perhaps there are places that are along those lines that are more thematic. What seems to happen is that if you apply certain values to a scheme to do with the level of design, the way light falls on it, the sense of communality, the outside space, the sense of distinctiveness, the architectural character, all these things that people are looking for now, sort of, a place that they feel is their own, it's not standardized, then that initially will attract kind of cooler younger people, but then other people, the same people who would go shop in a kind of nicely designed shop, or go to a beautiful restaurant, who may not be creative people, are also attracted to that because that's the way they live. And I think that's the nice thing that happened back then and is still happening now. So Chancery House is a project that we did for the Office Group. It's one of the last project we did for them. It's with the biggest one they'd ever done.
It won an award, didn't it?
Yes, several. It's one. It's been very well received, and it was one of the buildings that TOG looked at and said, right, we're going for this one. We've done 12 with them, but this one here, we literally went into every inch of the building and tried to create value in what was there, rather than adding extra floors on and things like that. We just tried to sweat the building for what it was. And there was talk at the time, because it's near the Inns of Court, that there would be mainly legal. It would be a legal centre. Actually, the first thing that happened, and it's a beautiful place, was that a fashion company came in and looked at this and looked at the shared workspace and said, yeah, we can. This is a good skeleton for how we work, and they understood how the shared workspaces outside of their demise would dovetail with what they do in their demise. And they came in, and then a few other companies like that come in, and then you get property companies and accountants and stuff, and they follow. And to me, that's a great thing. That's a sort of the blend that you create in these buildings by creating a visual and just the way the building is organised, an atmosphere. And I don't think we should be exclusive about that. I think it attracts all kinds of people and all different sizes of tenant as well. So it's a kind of setting of a vibe around the building, which is a generosity towards the way people use the buildings, and that's about the disposition of spaces, how open or closed it feels as you walk into the building, how much generosity there is around the building, how many other amenities around the building. So it's creating a kind of environment and an ecosystem between all of these different bits that sits comfortably with itself, which is something that you learn over doing lots of these projects. We don't put the meeting rooms here, we put them here. We don't size them like that, we size them like that. And our booths never really worked. Let's do them like this. And the acoustics were crap on that one. Let's do them like this. And that balance becomes universally appealing, I think. So yeah, Chancery's been really interesting. And we work together with a Danish architect called Norm.
I follow them. Yeah, carry on. I love their stuff.
Yeah, great. I mean, and collaborations can be a bind or they can be amazing.
Did it go well?
Really well, yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah, there was a lot of riffing going on between us and them, as in we might come up with a material palette or a way of working, an attitude towards the history of the building. So, for example, at the entrance of Chancery House, we built this big kind of vault door that was reminiscent of the silver vaults downstairs. And then they looked at the design and they went off and designed a kind of really lovely spun aluminium light fitting that was directly related to the entrance. So there was a lot of that going on, and a sort of I think it's quite refreshing working with a Danish company, because I think we have to work at good design in this country. They just know it. Yeah. So we weren't brought up on Alvar Aalto and Sarin and all those, but they were.
No. I do agree. The whole Scandinavian thing is.
Yeah.
I mean, I just love going there.
Yeah. You walk into a furniture shop there and everything's just beautiful. And here sometimes it is.
Yeah.
I think we're good at it, but I think we it definitely doesn't come naturally. So that was a very easy, comfortable collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you said you got that building, you got that brief, and you're looking at sweating the whole building, was there a potential that you're going to build more floors on top? Is that what you're saying? And then you stop that and you maximize the space internally instead?
There are a few things that the property industry is really guilty of. I'd say they fall in when you're sort of bidding for a building like that. I suspect, and I saw some of the competition of schemes that were trying to buy that building at the same time that TOG were. They all added on. It was all a competition to see how much more net area you could get, and that was what defined value. Whereas TOG would look at it and say, no, let's just create the value by opening up the basement, bringing light in better, and making sure that we use every inch of the building we have. I don't know intricately their business model, but they obviously then look at that and go, well, we don't need to add extra floor, and it's enormous amounts of cost. There's all other implications of just focusing on net area as the main value generator. And I think that for most of the projects we did with them, it was all about saying, well, who needs parking? Let's get rid of the parking and put in other uses. But hang on a minute, you can't just put a gym in a dark, crap basement. How are we going to bring lights in? How are we going to make the basement spaces, turn them from the worst spaces in the building to the best spaces in the building? And that is retrofit. That's really understanding how to get the best out of what you find. Mm-hmm. Adding extra floors, yes, of course, if you can do that and if it makes sense, you would do that. And quite often we've had several projects recently where the question is, if we don't get extra net area, how are we going to justify the loss of area that we need to create to put in better plant, more sustainable plant, better end of trip facilities? All these things take up net area, so you have to sometimes offset that loss. So it's a balance, but mostly those projects are about sweating the asset that you find.
I love that. That's great. I mean, it's so sensible. I mean, it's so on so many levels. If you can make that work,
Yeah.
the building's more efficient.
Yeah.
Rather than just adding space.
Well, you can add more space, but if it's not nice, then and that comes to the
working for you. It could be lovely, but if it's not working for you,
well, I think they do. We do add space onto buildings, obviously, but the other part of it is to do with what the space is. So quite a lot of the buildings we've looked at over the years for various different people, someone will have come along and go, well, that ceiling height's not BCO level ceiling height, so you can't use it. Whereas we wouldn't do that. We would just look at the building and say, well, that's 2 meters, we'll use it for that. That's 2.3, we'll use it for that. Or as long as we have 2.9 next to 2.3, then the 2.3 kind of works. We'll just put some booths or some meeting, whatever it might be, or that's the kind of little cavern-y meeting room or whatever. And that is where I think that the standardization of office spec, as important as it is to elevate the standard from rubbish to okay, to become inspirational, you need to not just consider technical standards. I'm not saying that technical standards are not important, but they're very convenient for people who are not that sort of thoughtful about how things can be beautiful and not that poetic. Or as long as it meets this lux level, this ceiling level, then that's a good office. But actually, that's been the cause of people becoming disinterested in their offices because they're not distinctive. They're standardized by definition. Mm-hmm. So that comes back to my first point about going into standard offices when I was growing up with standard ceiling heights and standard suspended ceilings. Everybody knows that removing suspended ceilings is better these days. Not always, but mostly. Mm-hmm. But yeah, meeting technical standards is an easy get out for being creative.
Yeah. Can I pick up on something that you've mentioned a few minutes back? And that was, I might sound like an idiot, so forgive me, but you spoke about being generous with space and design. Yeah. What do you mean by that? Because it sounds really interesting, but I don't fully know what that is.
I think it's a sensitivity towards people and how they feel when they walk into spaces. So generous doesn't have to mean just loads of space. It can be sort of giving people a bit of peace by creating a little sort of small area where they can break out or whatever, but sort of creating places that people feel comfortable to inhabit and thinking about the tenant and the user of the building and the human experience of the building. Because in my view, whether something's made of gold or marshmallows really doesn't make any difference if the diagram and the way things are arranged has a sense of generosity about it. So in my own office, we work very densely. So we're less than 1 per 5 square meters in our office, but we have a really generous area at the front, which is our shared area that when people want to break out, they go there. So it doesn't have to be just by offering up loads of space. It's about how you design things and how you offset things that are not generous with something that's over generous, for example. That can go for anything. So I was talking about ceiling heights, where you can have low ceiling heights as long as you've got some high ones. You can also have areas that are very poorly lit, as long as there are other areas that are quite brightly lit. And that goes for acoustics and all of these different elements of the design. It's about contrast and balancing those things. When we walked into this room, there was an immediate change in the acoustic character from out there, and that was really enjoyable. And that happens at Chancery House, for example, when you walk from the sort of quite bustly reception area into one of the meeting rooms, which we've used an acoustic treatment on the ceiling, which is quite full on and quite strong. You really notice the sort of it becomes a very human experience of being able to focus on the person you're talking to, for example, because you can actually hear them. And I think those are things that people don't focus on in design enough. And I think on a client level, they're things that people are not necessarily well versed in even discussing. So I think it's on the architects and the designers to really introduce those other bits in. So acoustics is a really big one, and air quality and those sorts of things are things that people don't necessarily understand.
No, I I love the terminology, and I love the contrast and balance, not getting overly hung up if something isn't necessarily perfect, like the light or the sound or the height, but contrasting it back with the opposite somewhere else, and
what's perfect,
and creating that balance. Yeah, no, exactly.
But if you were looking, I mean, I refer back to this property search that we were doing for this law firm. You know, you walk into all these buildings and they all look the same. So is that perfect? Not really. It's just met a standard. Actually, the ones that were a bit like, okay, hadn't thought about it like that. Yes, those floors were split up, or this doesn't quite work the way it should work in my brief, in my diagram, but I like it. You know, and so I've strongly believed that. Yes, it's important to have technical standards, of course, but you need to approach them with a little bit of a pinch of salt. And I think that the BCO and the people who are sort of looking at that whole area will do well to sort of, and they do, to judge things according to slightly less fixed, according to values rather than standards. So values would be generosity, like you said, or sense of community, or identity or distinctiveness, and those sorts of things. So, for example, in our experience working with the office group, they had a very clear idea that they wouldn't have the same architect do everything, that they would find buildings of distinction that were different from one another. So if you worked in Chancery House, you may hate Summit House, so which may not be your thing. So you'd be you're less likely to leave the distinctive one. So they each building had its own identity, which then also slightly bleeds into how you express your identity as a business within a shared community workspace, because sometimes the brand of that shared workspace overwhelms the individual brands that are trying to sort of have a presence there. So it's about also slightly having a sensitivity towards that. So there are some flex workspace brands that put their brand quite hard forward. And I always liked, just my personal view, the way that Todd kind of sat back and allowed the building to be the brand. So people go, yeah, I'm in whichever of their buildings, with York House or whatever. Yeah. So that's very important as well.
You're more in a building rather than in a TOG. It's the building that's yours, rather than being associated with.
That was their take on it.
And it is interesting. I do agree. I was actually looking at it recently on a project with almost like some localization within globalization. Obviously, you've got to have the consistency, and I guess this goes to the standards and the technical thing overarching across all the locations.
Yeah.
Because there's the brand, and the clients want, and the staff need the consistency regardless of where they are in the world. But then to try and pick that little bit of Camden or even UK and put it in that space, but New York to have something different, so everyone feels heard and listened and understood.
Yeah,
it's kind of pulling those values through. It's really,
But they're hard things to do, and I think if you even with architects, I'm not a particularly technical person or technical architect. I always loved geography at school, and I loved human geography. And the human geography was always just about making sense of how people move around cities and how people enjoy them. And and we're doing a project at the moment. We were looking at I won't say where, a part of London, which is a very, very much business-focused area of London, and struggling as a result. And I always remember back to my geography O-level, where there was a central business district, and then everyone lived in the suburbs. And we've now learned that that's not the way it goes. People want to work in places like the West. There's no surprise that the West End's doing very well at the moment, because it's a big mixed up community with people living there, people playing there and eating there and working there, and that's what people want. And so this other part of town, which is more business focused, is trying to become more pluralistic in the environment of it. And I think those things really, really interest me. So as an architect, you can sort of choose to sort of focus on those sorts of concerns, whereas other people are more interested in the fabric and stuff like that, and that's fine. But I think that in the world of architecture, it's actually quite hard to find people who think that way, as people are very focused on beauty and surface and materiality, and which is important too, but mustn't ever forget the human experience. In fact, never has it been more important for people to understand that, or designers to understand what the tenants want, and they ignore that at their peril, I think.
Yeah, we were talking about it the other day on a discussion somewhere. That design's very not, it's a very single word. Like, you think of interior design and you think, oh, architecture, but it's not. It's like, it's psychology, there's sustainability, there's like sort of human behavior. There's so much in terms of people's mental and physical emotions and journeys in a space, and it's so deep what the amount of layers you're taking into consideration when you're, before you're vaguely getting into designing a space, when you're choosing the building and the contextual design and how people get there, and so deep. It's,
I think there's a bit it's hard to do. I'm not saying we do it particularly brilliantly, we try. I think that there's a poetry that not in a building that not everybody gets, and that's what you're trying to seek. And I always think about some of the people who started Derwent. You always remember when Simon Silver, they had the confidence to look at a building and just go, this doesn't make much sense financially, but I know this is a good building. And they were proper property people who just like had a gut feeling and a sense that this is a building of distinction. Similarly, we work with a company called Dorrington, and they just, they'll see a Voisey building, which we did Voisey House for them, and they just looked at it and went, we want that. And they obviously they're looking at the business case, but they know in their property gut that this is it's an instinctively a good thing to do. And I think there's a bit of a loss of that in the market, and a bit everything's sort of numbers, and I think people who are not doing it well are just only focusing on the numbers and not on the poetry, and that applies to the design as well, I guess. You can't design these things to a pattern.
Yeah, you got to work with the poetry. You got to work with the building, what comes available.
Yeah, and to make a sort of magical place is something that when people see it, they enjoy it. But I think that's where it's not great, when you see buildings that just you stick a load of crystal screens in or whatever. And there's a lot. I don't think that the user is fooled by kind of design that it sort of apes some other bit of design that was good by copying its materials, for example.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I was actually on it was a totally different sort of space, but one is actually outdoor space, but one was like a complete rectangle, and to my like very neat and tidy bit of me, like I much preferred the rectangle because everything was straight. And I was just talking with the designer on it, and then this other one was like this really odd shaped space, and the designer just totally went to this really odd shape and was like, we're definitely going to go with this space. I was like, oh, help, okay, talk to me. Like, why? And it's just got so many nooks and crannies. We don't have to like force them in via sort of creating spaces. It will flow and create in here, and it won't in there. And I was like, yeah, I totally get it now you've said it, but yeah, my instinctive reaction was to go with this very rectangle. So I can see this on the building sort of point you're saying, like finding that kind of that gut feel for something I know it's very different in a building than an outdoor space, but yeah, finding that kind of poetry, something special.
I can feel myself picking the rectangle.
Can you?
No, it's just easier.
I just like everything straight, but yeah, this has gone like all like weird, but yeah, creating nice pockets within it, which I'm confident it will work. I haven't seen the end result, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm quite a straight lines man myself, but we'll see.
Yeah, I am too. But I think as a practice, we do a lot of office space. We do a lot of other things as well. We still do residential and quite a lot of religious buildings and interesting things. And they all have they're all very, very different, but they have a thread going through them, which is to do with human experience and how you enjoy those spaces. And, that's the bit that I really enjoy.
Yeah. It's one continuous thread, isn't it? And it's always the people there and how they act and behave in the space and how we want to invoke their emotions, etc. So going forwards, like with your wildest dreams, Julian, like what would a project be that you would do, if anything was possible?
I think when you asked me that before, I did put the fear of God into me. But I think having done it now for a couple of decades in this form, I never really know what's coming, but I always really quite enjoy it. And actually, we don't really sort of guess what's coming in the future. We try to react to what's in front of us and to sort of do the best possible. And we're at the moment, at a meeting yesterday, we're working on a building in it's actually the Black Cat cigarette factory that Lazari owned down in Camden Town, trying to look at what we can do to that building to give it the kind of presence it deserves. It's a massive building in a really important part of London that's a sort of broken part of town. And we had a meeting with one of the neighbouring very interesting property owners. We're just talking about the vision for that area. And that's what really it was a really exciting meeting, because it was all about, you've got this part of Camden around Mornington Crescent that's got these individually amazing things that are just not connected to one another, and the potential to sort of look at all of the different people who own buildings around there, the way TfL run the roads around there, the way the parks, I mean, the park at the moment is all broken and it's a bit dangerous, and also not, whilst at the same time not losing the character of Camden, trying to sort of create a story for that whole part of town that repairs it, that makes it a place where you would be attracted to go. That is really interesting to me. Included in that is the restoration of this building, is getting people up onto the top of it, getting people into all bits of it that had just been shut off, and also sort of looking at these buildings that had traditionally been very closed, and they almost kind of folded their arms on what's quite a kind of hostile environment around, allowing them to kind of relax into a neighbourhood, and then watching that sort of become something that's good for me. It's near where I live, and I'd love to see that happen. My ambitions don't go sort of into space, but I think sort of repairing, when you've passed through a part of town for 50 years, which and just not really understood why it's so horrible, and then just suddenly given the opportunity to repair it, and then you meet people in the area who are inspirational, who also want to do that. I find that's fascinating. We've done it in other parts of town. I was involved in a project up in Highgate, where there was a new parade on Swains Lane that was just looking like it was going to screw up, and we got involved in trying to improve the retail there, and to sort of define what kinds of retail should go in and what would make a neighbourhood work. And it's happened, and it's very nice. It's not perfect, but it's a sort of opportunity to sort of take some of your values and put them into practice. Mm-hmm. And I think this thing in Camden potentially could just be amazing. And I think that the more different property owners try to work together, I mean, when the estates, for example, had control of various bits of London, they could define the character of an area, whether it's De Walden and Marylebone, whatever it might be. And I think in a lot of areas, especially if you took somewhere like Camden, the problem with it is they're all owned by different people, and there's no one bringing them together to try and sort of say, well, if we all sort of looked at creating a quarter here or a district, and how we can all work together, everyone kind of just acts in their own best interests, and I think that's a difficulty, a challenge when you're trying to sort of unify areas and give them identity and have a vision and a common story. So those are the things that I really enjoy, and that's all about meeting interesting people and understanding how these areas function. And I mean, funny enough, in that conversation, we talked a lot about the troubles that area faces as well, in terms of the stuff that happens on the street, and sort of trying to take that into account but not erase it. So I think Camden actually does it relatively well, in the parts are still a bit grimy, but it's moving forward. So yeah, that's, I suppose, everything that we're talking about here comes down to the way, it's not really about materiality, it's about the way people use buildings.
I was going to say, it all seems to be boiling down to your human geography kind of question.
For me.
There, yeah. No, yeah. I'm seeing even in this project, like you're talking about like different disconnected parts, but beautiful parts, pockets, and then bringing those together. And that's kind of human geography of people maneuvering between spaces or going up or down or round and around.
Yeah, but that's how we approach all the design projects, and that's, all these workspaces. They were all about how do you create an indulgent workplace for people that is beautifully designed, that's sincere, and that people buy into. And like I said before, people don't want to be patronised and not stupid. They know quality when they see it. They also know things that are thin when they see it. They don't last.
Yeah. And what are some of the challenges that you're facing on that redevelopment, like bringing people together? Is that something that you've got into yet, or is it too early days?
I guess it's with all these things, it's sort of going over the top. You can very easily not be ambitious enough because you're constrained by the rules and the standards that are in front of you, but that shouldn't stop you from creating a bigger story and a bigger vision for something, and being ambitious. So, for example, if you're doing a building if we're doing Chancery House, we might draw the most ambitious scheme because that sets out the key values, but then it might get pulled back to a deliverable or phased reality. So I think it's being able to, on the one hand, have a conversation with the client and with everyone around about what the ideal would be, setting up some key principles, and then being able to also inhabit the realistic position as well, and picking off the things that you can actually deliver that are steps on the way to the bigger vision, I guess. But it's all a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh. It's basically sort of change management and people management. People to come together and
I mean, but you'll get people who'll say, well, Camden's not nice, but that's not very helpful. Or when we did the Swains Lane thing, which was, I didn't do the architecture, we just got involved in how those shops all functioned. A lot of people said, well, it's impossible, there are no small shops anymore. We're like, well, maybe what people want them, So we went off and me and a couple of neighbours, and we set up a group in Camden to consult the local community about what they wanted, and lo and behold, people want a butcher, baker, candlestick maker. So that's kind of
the feedback.
That was the feedback. Yeah, we don't want another Tesco Metro, Tesco local or whatever, because it's the same thing as the office's standardization and lack of identity is not attractive to a lot of people. People want to sort of feel ownership of a community or a building or whatever. So yeah, that is what came back. And then, as it turns out, a lot of the brands or these small shops that have come into this area that we looked at are doing extremely well. And there is an appetite for small businesses and sort of local identity and that kind of thing.
That's lovely to hear. Really encouraging for Gale's Bakery.
Well, there's a Gale's there as well, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing, also, because that sort of sets a certain aspiration. I don't know. Actually, funny enough, in that area, so we're sort of straying right off it. In that area, there's a lot of small chains that masquerade as independence in a way, and it might be that that's where things are going in that sense. So true independents that only have one branch do exist, but that's quite a challenging environment for them, I think. So there are these brands that sort of don't have a different name for each of their things, and there's could be less than 10 in London or something like that, but that's quite common.
Yeah, I see.
I don't know if you wanted to talk about all that.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? I do love how the more and more I'm talking to people, the more and more I'm hearing about there's businesses on scale, there's chains on scale, things on scale just generally, but people having their individual personal pockets, and whether you're at home in Banstead, your experience would be different to if you're in Clerkenwell, because you are in a different frame of mind and you're probably with a different set of people and you want a different experience.
Yeah.
And then fast growing brands like Blank Street Coffee, about maintaining they obviously have to maintain their identity, but keep just not becoming another Starbucks basically, and keeping that uniqueness.
Yeah.
What Blank Street is known for in each of its areas.
Right.
And yeah, it just seems to be such a big thing. People having their, I think you've wrapped it all up in a word, in their identity and that individuality.
Yeah.
Is so key, which is sort of interesting, really. I hadn't thought about it a lot, but in the last 6 months I've heard about it loads.
Well, we're tired of standardization because it just doesn't. It's just not very exciting, is it?
No.
You know,
it's predictable.
Yeah. I think that. I mean, maybe I don't know. I think a lot of people really enjoy going to Westfield and places like that, but for me, it's just like going to Gatwick Airport with nowhere interesting to go afterwards. You know, and it's all just like sort of a very sort of repeated product. But I think a lot of people know that. But when sort of coming back to the office thing, the standardization, I think, is a real threat to the success of offices, because whilst offices remain a kind of uninteresting environment, it's an easy choice to make whether to stay at home or come to the office. You know, so we've worked very hard in our own office for architects, which, to be fair, it's quite easy to get architects to come in because they want to talk and they want to draw and they want to be together. And I think there's other businesses where it's harder. But if you're going to, I mean, the law firm, I keep going back to that, is really interesting because you've got a whole load of well-paid lawyers who have got kids who, again, this is a whole other thing, who've had to cash out of London or have cashed out of London in order to create more space, and it's not convenient for them to come back into town, and they've got used to working from home, and they've got a lovely shed in the garden where, you know, and a pool or whatever it is, that, you know, they have no reason to come back. So you've got to give people a reason to want to come into the office. And I'd like to think our office. Have you been to our office?
Yeah.
I mean, our office, like, people, it's got a vibe and people want to be there. And like, you know, when we interview people for jobs and they sort of have a look around and like, yeah, I like this. And I think that you can't not do that anymore.
I know your office, I give it to you, is absolutely beautiful. And then I think the next thing that was nice is I started asking questions, because I really liked it just personally. Like, it was really I love that style, and everything had like a bit of a story to it and it had depth to it. It wasn't just a design. It was quite not like a museum, because that makes it sound like old, and it's not, but you get what I mean. It was very interesting. It was very storytelling. Well,
it's specific to us, but also it's a sort of supposed to sort of pick up on a lot of the things that we've learned from doing loads of stuff for TOG, and those, how we can work flexibly. You know, I sort of go, there's a couple of little shared workspaces that I would visit where they haven't got it right in terms of how a shared work table works, for example, and you sit there and there's someone who's kind of bellowing in your face. So those are the sort of things we wanted to try and repair in our office, and show that we knew we had a sensitivity to how we can all be quite densely packed into a space whilst not upset each other or be too noisy and those sorts of things. So yeah, it's been very well thought through, and sort of actually my me and Gemma, my wife, and all of us worked on it together, and nearly killed us, so, arguing about it so much. But there was a lot of careful sort of consideration gone into it.
A lot of passion.
Yeah, but again, you know, that's. I mean, you look in the paper only yesterday, and the government are saying, you know, people are more productive at home, and I don't know where they get that from.
Yeah, I'm not sure where they get it from. I mean, I can only talk for myself. I haven't done a survey across a load of people. Do you know what I mean? And I definitely need to get out for myself.
Well, they were reacting. It's in the paper this morning. I think they were reacting to Amazon sort of getting rid of their home working policy or whatever it might be. But you just think, if it was more productive, business would do it. You know, and so in my experience, we're less productive, and we really struggled. You know, through COVID, it was hard work, and we're really just getting the team sort of feeling like a unit, and it's lovely, and that's what, you know, we went from an office not in central London. We came from sort of slightly out, and I realised that if we wanted to do it, we had to make an office that everyone wanted to come to, and that was pleasurable to come to, and that needed to be in a kind of mixed up, pluralistic area with beautiful restaurants and nice parks, and, you know, that's a good part of town. You know, but I think it's very important. And again, there's a sort of a joy that you get from being in an office with other people, that I think it's a real danger to lose that.
And I can also sympathise with people if they haven't got that. You're talking about a nice vibe and surrounding contextual, like being all just right and well considered, so people want to come in. Yeah, fine, but also sympathise with people that they haven't got that. And people haven't necessarily got, I don't know, what the leadership or the technology or the space, physical space, and that sort of thing. It's hard for them to get in. Yeah,
but I think also, like, good business leaders, again, a lot of these companies we're working for at the moment, doing fit outs for them, recognise the value of culture, and they recognise, they've seen how, I mean, we have people who were working remotely who I kind of couldn't remember who they were, or they just sort of became slightly ghost-like in the office, and that's not good for your office culture. So yeah, as designers, we have to create a kind of an armature for these people and an attraction for them to come in and sort of engage, and in my experience, if you provide that, they do.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right. When you do it right,
But it's complicated because, you know, when I couldn't afford to buy a house in London, had bought a house in kind of Stevenage or whatever, it's like it's a bigger ask to get those people back. So I think it's linked into all loads of other things, like the housing market, you know, the type and tenure of the housing that we create in cities I think is a big problem. You know, we this government are going to push to build. I think is what they said. Build loads of residential space, but isn't it important what that space is? You know, and how you could, for example, accommodate a family in a city. Because if we have no families left because they just can't afford it, then all this becomes self-fulfilling prophecy, because they won't want to jump on the train and come in and come to work. So it just changes everything. So there's a complicated city discussion. I don't think there's anyone really discussing how you might create family housing at density, or even if that's possible. I don't know. And most, you know, all the housing we do is sort of generally 2-bedroom flats, 1-bedroom flats, and occasionally they chuck in 3s if they absolutely have to, but they don't really want to. And that then means that people move out of town, and when they move out of town, they don't want to come in, and it's just, yeah.
Vicious circle.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah. No, excellent. Thank you very much, Julian. I think we've covered a lot, and yeah, definitely challenged what I've heard before. So it was excellent.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's good.
Excellent to hear it. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you wanted to add or close off?
No, I've really enjoyed it. It's just really nice to meet you, and I wish you the best with the podcast, and I'm sure sort of look more closely at your products. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much for listening. I'm also very grateful to all our guests. If you've enjoyed it, please do leave us a rating and a follow. Or if you know who else would like to join the podcast, share the names. We're always open to hearing. Until next time, keep happy, keep healthy, and take care.